The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers stretched high above the assembly floor, its translucent walls shimmering with the light of 1,000 distant stars. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated sectors, each species maintaining careful distance from the others. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert the cacophony of alien languages into something resembling universal understanding. At the center of the vast chamber stood a lone human figure, dwarfed by the towering alien delegates surrounding him. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun of the United States Marine Corps stood at perfect attention, his dress blue uniform immaculate despite the 3-month journey through space to reach this moment. His ribbon rack told a story of service across multiple worlds, though none of the aliens bothered to read it. The Zephyrian ambassador, a towering insectoid creature with mandibles that clicked rhythmically when agitated, leaned forward in his crystalline chair. So this is what humanity sends to represent their species in matters of galactic security? His voice dripped with disdain as the translation reached every corner of the chamber. A single soldier from a backwards world that has barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Ripples of what passed for laughter among the various species echoed through the dome. The Corvin delegation, massive reptilian beings covered in natural armor plating, hissed their amusement. Even the usually stoic Valdris, ethereal beings of pure energy contained within mechanical suits, pulsed with colors that their species used to express mirth. Ambassador Sarah Mitchell, Earth's diplomatic representative, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had argued against this plan from the beginning, but the Joint Chiefs had been adamant. Earth needed to prove itself worthy of full council membership, and, apparently, the only way to do that was through their trial system. Each applicant species had to demonstrate their military capability by having a single representative complete the gauntlet of worlds. The Zephyrian ambassador's antennae twitched as he continued his address to the assembly. The human species requests full membership in our council, yet they offer us this. Look at him. No natural armor, no enhanced strength, no psychic abilities, no advanced bioweapons. Humans are soft, weak creatures who rely entirely on primitive tools and crude machinery. Marcus remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the ambassador's head. 20 years in the Corps had taught him when to speak and when to listen. This was definitely a listening moment. The Thraxian war chief, a being that resembled a walking mountain of muscle and bone spikes, rumbled his agreement. My scouts have observed human military operations. They are chaotic, unpredictable, and wasteful. They throw away lives with reckless abandon and show no understanding of proper battlefield tactics. How can such a species contribute to galactic security? More sounds of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Quantum Collective, a hive mind species that appeared as a shifting cloud of microscopic particles, pulsed with unanimous disapproval. Even the normally neutral Etherians, ancient beings who rarely spoke in council sessions, murmured their doubts about humanity's application. Marcus finally allowed his gaze to sweep across the assembled aliens. Each species represented hundreds or thousands of worlds, civilizations that had conquered space while humans were still discovering fire. The weight of representing his entire species should have been crushing, but instead he felt something else entirely. He felt insulted. The Zephyrian ambassador gestured toward a massive holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber. The Gauntlet of Worlds consists of 3 trials, each designed to test different aspects of military capability. The first trial takes place on Kepler 442b, a world we have designated as a combat simulation zone. The human must survive for 72 hours while being hunted by our finest warriors from 5 different species. The hologram showed a harsh, mountainous world with deep valleys and dense forests. Automated defenses dotted the landscape, and Marcus could see the outlines of fortified positions built into the cliff sides. The second trial, the ambassador continued, will test tactical thinking and resource management. The human will be given command of a mixed-species military unit and tasked with defending a civilian population from simulated invasion. Previous applicants have had varying degrees of success with this challenge. The display shifted to show a sprawling city surrounded by defensive barriers. Marcus noted the choke points, the elevated positions, and the potential weaknesses in the perimeter. Old habits died hard. The final trial is perhaps the most important. The Zephyrian's voice carried a note of satisfaction that didn't need translation. Single combat against a champion chosen by the Council. This champion will be selected from among our most elite warriors, and the combat will be to the death. A collective intake of breath came from the human delegation. Ambassador Mitchell half rose from her seat before catching herself and sitting back down. This detail had not been shared during the preliminary negotiations. The war chief of the Thraxians stood to his full, intimidating height. I volunteered to serve as champion for the final trial. It has been too long since I have had the opportunity to test myself against new prey. The creature was easily 9 feet tall and probably weighed half a ton. Its arms were longer than Marcus was tall, and each finger ended in claws that looked capable of rending steel. The Thraxians were renowned throughout the galaxy as natural warriors, born and bred for combat on one of the most dangerous worlds in known space. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system. I accept all conditions of the trial. The Zephyrian ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly in surprise. Most species requested time to deliberate, to send for specialized warriors or request modifications to the trials. The human had accepted immediately, without consultation or negotiation. You understand, the ambassador said slowly, that failure in any trial means not only the rejection of your species application, but also your own death. There is no retreat, no surrender, no calling for extraction. You will succeed or you will die. Understood, Marcus replied simply. The Corvin delegation leader, a massive female with scars covering her armored hide, leaned forward with interest. Tell us, little human, what makes you believe you can succeed where others have failed? What special abilities do you possess that we cannot observe? Marcus allowed himself a small smile, the first expression he had shown since entering the chamber. I'm a United States Marine, ma'am. We specialize in doing the impossible with whatever we have at hand. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as alien laughter. The various species expressed their amusement in different ways, clicking, hissing, color changes, and harmonic vibrations that made the translator systems work overtime. Bravado will not save you in the trials, the Thraxian war chief growled. I have killed champions of a dozen species. Your soft human flesh will tear like wet paper under my claws. We shall see, Marcus replied calmly. The Zephyrian ambassador called for order. Very well. The trials will begin in standard galactic time period of 72 hours. This will allow the human time to prepare and for us to make final arrangements for the testing grounds. I suggest you use this time wisely, human. It may be the last 72 hours of your life. As the session adjourned and the various delegations began filing out of the chamber, Ambassador Mitchell approached Marcus. Her face was pale with worry. Marcus, what have you done? She whispered. The intelligence reports on these trials show a 60% fatality rate, and that's for species with natural advantages we simply don't have. The Thraxians alone have never lost a champion combat trial. Marcus straightened his uniform jacket and picked up his cover. Ma'am, with respect, those species made one critical error in their calculations. What's that? They're not Marines. As they walked through the corridors of the council station toward the human quarters, Marcus could feel the eyes of 100 different species watching him. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with pity, and a few with what might have been anticipation. None looked at him with respect. That was going to change. In the human delegation's quarters, Marcus spread out detailed intelligence reports on the 3 trial locations. The data was thorough: topographical maps, climate readings, local fauna reports, and historical records of previous trials. The council had provided everything openly, confident that knowledge alone would not be enough to ensure success. The first trial is straightforward, Marcus said, studying the terrain maps of Kepler 442b. 5 hunters, 72 hours, I have to survive. They'll have advantages, better senses, natural weapons, home field advantage since they've trained on this world before. The hunters are volunteers from the Council's finest military units, Ambassador Mitchell added, reading from her briefing notes. A Thraxian berserker, a Zephyrian scout with enhanced sensory capabilities, a Corvin heavy trooper with personal energy shields, a quantum collective node capable of splitting into multiple entities, and a Valdrus energy being that can phase through solid matter. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So speed, stealth, defense, multiplication, and intangibility. Impressive. He looked up from the maps. They picked a good variety of specialists. Marcus, be serious. How can you possibly evade beings like that for 3 full days? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the council station, it was a genuinely confident expression. Ma'am, the question isn't how I'm going to evade them for 72 hours. Then what is the question? The question is whether I can make it last that long. The next day, Marcus was transported to Kepler 442b aboard a Zephyrian vessel. The planet was everything the briefings had indicated: harsh, mountainous, with dense forests in the valleys, and bare rock faces stretching toward a pale yellow sun. The air was thinner than Earth normal, but breathable, and the gravity was about 15% higher. Marcus was given standard field gear, combat uniform, basic survival supplies, and a single magazine for his sidearm. No additional ammunition, no heavy weapons, no communication devices. The hunters would be equipped with their natural abilities, plus whatever technological advantages their species typically employed. The drop point was a small clearing in the center of the largest forest continent. As the transport lifted away, Marcus found himself alone on an alien world with less than an hour before 5 of the galaxy's finest warriors began hunting him. He immediately set to work. Years of survival training kicked in as he surveyed his surroundings. The forest was dense with vegetation unlike anything on Earth, but the principles remained the same. He needed water, shelter, concealment, and, most importantly, he needed to turn the environment to his advantage. Marcus had lied to the Council, but only by omission. He wasn't just a Marine. He was a Force Reconnaissance Marine with 3 tours in the most hostile environments humanity had ever encountered. He had survived in places where the local wildlife actively hunted humans, where the terrain itself was a weapon, and where staying alive for 24 hours was considered an achievement. As he began implementing his survival plan, Marcus smiled grimly. The aliens had made their first tactical error by thinking like hunters instead of thinking like prey. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous animal in the forest was the one that looked the most harmless. The timer on his gear indicated 53 minutes until the hunt began. Marcus disappeared into the forest, already becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a human being fighting for the survival of his entire species. The hunting party materialized at the drop coordinates exactly 1 hour after Marcus had been deposited. Each member of the team was a specialist, chosen specifically to represent the pinnacle of their species' military capability. They had volunteered for this assignment with confidence bordering on arrogance. Zara Thix, the Zephyrian scout, immediately began analyzing the area with her enhanced sensory organs. Her compound eyes could detect movement across multiple spectrums, and her antennae picked up chemical traces that painted a detailed picture of recent activity. The human passed through here approximately 57 minutes ago, she reported to her team. He moved east toward the river valley. Gornash, the massive Thraxian berserker, snorted with disdain. A direct path to water. Predictable. These soft creatures always prioritize their basic needs over tactical thinking. His massive frame cracked branches as he moved, and his claws left deep gouges in the alien trees. I will track him along the river. The rest of you can sweep the flanks. Korvok Prime, the heavily armored Corvin trooper, activated his personal energy shields. The shimmering barrier would protect him from most projectile weapons and energy blasts. Remember, we are to hunt, not simply kill. The Council wants to observe human responses under pressure. We should flush him toward the designated observation zones. The quantum collective node, appearing as a shifting cloud of metallic particles, split into 3 separate entities. We will establish a perimeter, the entities said in perfect unison. The human cannot escape our surveillance network. Veltar, the Valdrus energy being phased in and out of the visible spectrum. Within his containment suit, pure energy crackled with anticipation. I will scout ahead and identify his hiding positions. These corporeal beings leave such obvious traces. What none of them knew was that Marcus had been counting on their confidence. 3 kilometers away, Marcus lay motionless in a carefully constructed hide built into the side of a rocky outcrop. He had spent the first 50 minutes not just moving east, but creating a false trail that would lead the hunters exactly where he wanted them to go. Every broken branch, every footprint in the soft earth, every trace of his passage had been deliberately placed. The real path he had taken led northwest, through a stream that would mask his scent, across bare rock that would hide his footprints, and into a maze of canyons that would break up their formation. He had learned long ago that the best way to survive being hunted was to hunt your hunters in return. Through a camouflage scope made from polished metal and alien crystal, Marcus watched as Gornash followed his false trail toward the river. The massive Thraxian was strong and fast, but he moved like most apex predators, with the confidence of something that had never been prey. That confidence was about to become a liability. Marcus had spent his preparation time studying the local ecosystem. This world's trees contained a sap that was highly flammable when exposed to electrical current. The rocks were rich in iron oxide, which could be turned into thermite with the right chemical catalyst. Even a local insect secreted compounds that could be weaponized by someone who knew what they were doing. The Thraxian reached the river and paused, his massive head turning as he searched for tracks. Marcus had indeed entered the water at this point, but not to drink or hide. He had gone into the river to set his first trap. Gornash stepped onto what appeared to be a natural stone formation spanning the river. The rocks shifted beneath his weight, not enough to throw him off balance, but enough to trigger the mechanism Marcus had built. A counterweight system made from stones and vines released a payload of the flammable tree sap mixed with iron oxide compound, all suspended in the water directly upstream from the Thraxian. The electrical charge came from Marcus's field radio, its battery rewired to deliver a high-voltage pulse through metal conductors he had placed in the riverbed. When a mixture reached the conductors, the resulting explosion sent a geyser of superheated steam and burning chemicals 30 feet into the air. Gornash roared in pain and surprise as the scalding mixture covered his armor plating. The natural protection that made Thraxians nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons became a liability as the burning chemicals stuck to his hide. He thrashed in the water, trying to wash away the substance, but thermite continued burning even underwater. Hunter down came Zarathix's voice over the communication system. Gornash is injured, but mobile. The human has turned the environment into a weapon. Marcus was already moving to his next position. The explosion would draw the others, and he needed to be ready for them. His combat pack contained enough materials to construct 12 more traps, each designed to exploit the specific weaknesses he had observed in the alien species dossiers. The quantum collective entities reached the river first, their ability to split into multiple forms, allowing them to approach from 3 directions simultaneously. They found Gornash pulling himself from the water, his armor blackened, and his hide burned in several places. Scan the area, the entities commanded in unison. Identify the mechanism used for this attack. As the cloud beings spread out to examine the trap's remains, Marcus triggered his second surprise. He had spent 20 minutes weaving a net from the local vegetation, but this wasn't a simple snare. The fibers he had chosen were from a plant that released electromagnetic pulses when crushed, a defense mechanism against the planet's native predators. When the quantum collective entities passed through the nearly invisible net, the electromagnetic discharge disrupted their particle cohesion. The effect was temporary but dramatic. All three entities lost their humanoid shape and collapsed into chaotic swirls of metallic dust. Marcus used their moment of disorientation to implement the next phase of his plan. He had identified a weakness in their formation. They were hunting like a pack, but they weren't really working together. Each species fought in their own way, using their own strengths, without adapting to work as a true unit. Humans, on the other hand, had spent thousands of years learning to fight as smaller, weaker beings in a world full of things trying to kill them. They had gotten very good at working together, thinking creatively, and turning disadvantages into advantages. Zarathix arrived at the river to find both Gornash and the quantum collective compromised. Her enhanced senses immediately began scanning for the human's location. But Marcus had expected this. He had spent the last 30 minutes preparing for her specifically. The Zephyrian Scout's compound eyes could see across multiple spectrums, but they were designed to track movement and heat signatures. They were not designed to interpret visual illusions created by someone who understood how perception worked. Marcus had constructed what military tacticians called a mirror maze, a series of reflective surfaces made from polished metal and water puddles that created multiple false images of heat and movement. To Zarathix's enhanced senses, it appeared as though humans were everywhere and nowhere. She fired her energy weapon at 3 different positions, but each shot hit only mirrors and empty air. Meanwhile, Marcus was using the confusion to close distance with a weapon he had crafted from local materials, a sling made from woven plant fibers, and a projectile made from the densest stone he could find. The rock struck Zarathix in her sensory cluster, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to disrupt her enhanced perception. Temporarily blinded, she stumbled backward and triggered another of Marcus's traps, a pit covered with vegetation that dropped her 10 feet into a cage made from the native plant fibers. The cage wouldn't hold her for long, but it didn't need to. Marcus was already moving to deal with the remaining 2 hunters. Korvac Prime had been approaching cautiously, his energy shields at maximum power. The Corvin had observed the fate of his teammates and was not about to underestimate the human. His personal barrier could stop any projectile or energy beam the primitive human technology could produce. What could not stop was the avalanche Marcus triggered by destabilizing a key support rock formation above the Corvin's position. Thousands of tons of stone and debris crashed down onto the alien trooper. His energy shields held against the initial impact, but they were not designed to support the weight of half a mountainside. Korvac Prime found himself buried under rubble, his shield straining to maintain a pocket of breathable space around him. He would survive, but he was effectively removed from a hunt. That left only Veltar, the Valdris energy being. This was the opponent Marcus had been most concerned about. The ability to phase through solid matter made conventional traps useless, and energy beings were nearly impossible to track or predict. Marcus had spent considerable time studying the briefing materials on Valdris physiology, looking for any weakness he could exploit. He had found one, but it would require perfect timing and considerable risk. Valdris energy beings maintain their consciousness and form through their containment suits. The suits were technological marvels that allowed pure energy to interact with the physical world. But they had to vent excess energy regularly to prevent overload, and during those venting cycles, the beings were temporarily vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. Marcus had been monitoring the Valdris Hunter's energy signature using his modified field radio. The readings showed a regular cycle. Veltar would need to vent in approximately 4 minutes. Marcus had one chance to be in the right position with the right equipment when that happened. He sprinted through the forest toward a clearing where exposed mineral veins created natural electromagnetic fields. If he could amplify those fields at the exact moment Veltar, was venting energy, he might be able to disrupt the being's containment long enough to win the trial. Veltar materialized directly in front of him, the alien's energy form crackling with power. "Clever little human," the being said, his voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. "You have surprised us all. But now you face me directly, and I'm not vulnerable to your primitive tricks." "You're right," Marcus agreed, raising his hands in apparent surrender. "I can't hurt you with rocks and sticks." The Valdris being pulsed with what might have been satisfaction. "Then you acknowledge defeat?" Marcus smiled grimly and pointed to his modified field radio, which was counting down from 30 seconds. "No, I acknowledge physics." Veltar looked at the device in confusion, then at the mineral formation surrounding them. His energy signature began to spike as he realized what the human had done. The electromagnetic fields in this area were about to be artificially amplified, and his containment suit was already approaching a mandatory vent cycle. "Impossible," the alien whispered. "You cannot have calculated the timing so precisely with such primitive equipment." Marcus's smile widened. "You keep calling our stuff primitive. That's your second mistake. What was the first?" The field radio hit zero, triggering the electromagnetic pulse Marcus had rigged using every battery and power cell from his equipment. The pulse synchronized perfectly with Veltar's energy vent, causing a feedback loop that overloaded the containment suit systems. Veltar's form destabilized, his consciousness scattered across multiple energy wavelengths. The containment suit began emergency protocols, but it would take several minutes to restore proper function. Marcus stood in the clearing, surrounded by 5 of the galaxy's finest warriors, all of them defeated or neutralized. His equipment was exhausted, his traps were expended, and he was physically and mentally drained from 16 hours of constant tactical thinking. But he was alive, and the first trial was over. As the Galactic Council's retrieval ships arrived to collect both the human and the defeated hunting party, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Council had expected him to run and hide to survive through luck and desperation. Instead, he had fought back. He had turned a hunting exercise into a demonstration of human military philosophy: adapt, overcome, and win. The second trial would test his ability to command alien troops in defense of civilian populations. The council members who had laughed at him in the assembly chamber were no longer laughing. They were starting to pay attention. The observation deck of the council station was packed with delegates from every member species. What had started as casual entertainment, watching a primitive human fail spectacularly, had become the most watched trial in council history. The betting pools had shifted dramatically after Marcus's performance in the first trial, but most aliens still expected him to fail when faced with actual command responsibility. Marcus stood in the briefing room aboard a council military vessel, studying holographic displays of his second trial scenario. The simulation was based on a real historical event: the defense of Colony Kepler 438c against the Devourer's incursion. The original defenders had failed, and 3 million civilians had been consumed by the hive mind species that saw all organic life as food. Your command consists of 1 battalion from 5 different species, the briefing officer, a cold-voiced Zephyrian, explained. 200 Corvin heavy infantry, 150 Thraxian shock troops, 100 Valdris energy commandos, 75 quantum collective tactical units, and 50 Zephyrian scouts. Each group has their own command structure, their own tactics, and their own ideas about how this battle should be fought. Marcus nodded, studying the unit compositions. This wasn't just a test of tactical planning. It was a test of leadership under the worst possible conditions. Command a mixed-species force that had never worked together, with no common doctrine, defending against an enemy that had already proven capable of defeating the original garrison. The civilian population consists of 2.8 million beings from 12 different species, the briefing officer continued. They cannot be evacuated in time, and they cannot defend themselves. If more than 10% casualties occur among the civilian population, The trial is considered a failure. What about the enemy force? Marcus asked. The holographic display shifted to show a writhing mass of organic ships approaching the planet. 12,000 devourer bioforms, including heavy assault strains, aerial swarms, and 3 hive mind nodes. They will coordinate perfectly, adapt to your tactics in real time, and they will never retreat or show mercy. Marcus studied the approaching force with professional interest. The Devourers were essentially organic machines, bred and evolved for one purpose: consuming other species and converting their biomass into more Devourers. They were fast, adaptive, and absolutely relentless. Any questions? The briefing officer asked. Just one, Marcus replied. When do I meet my command staff? 20 minutes later, Marcus walked into a compartment filled with the largest collection of alien military officers he had ever seen. The tension in the room was immediate and obvious. Corvan officers sat separately from Thraxian leaders, who glared at the Valdrus energy beings floating in their containment suits. The Quantum Collective representatives maintained their distance from everyone, while the Zephyrian scouts perched on elevated positions around the room's perimeter. Gentlemen, ladies, and energy beings, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the translation system. I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun, and I'll be your commanding officer for this operation. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Snarls, clicks, harmonic protests, and particle swarm agitation filled the room as every species objected to being commanded by the others, let alone by a human. With respect, human, rumbled Karask Major Thane, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak. My troops do not take orders from softskins. We have been warriors for 10,000 years while your species was still hiding in caves. My shock troops follow only the strongest, added Thraxian battle leader Graxike, his claws extending slightly. You have not proven your strength in combat. You have only shown cleverness, which is not the same thing. Marcus let them voice their objections for exactly 30 seconds. Then he slammed his sidearm onto the metal table. The sharp sound cut through the alien protests like a blade. Are you done? He asked calmly. Because while you've been arguing about who's in charge, 12,000 Devourers have gotten 6 minutes closer to eating 2.8 million civilians. The room fell silent. Marcus picked up his weapon and holstered it with deliberate precision. Let me explain something to all of you, he continued, moving to the tactical display. This isn't about me being better than you. This isn't about humans being superior to your species. This is about the fact that I'm the only one in this room who has actually fought a successful multi-species defense operation. That got their attention. Valdr's commander Luxera pulsed with skeptical colors. Explain. Marcus activated the holographic display, showing a barren, crater-marked world. 2 years ago, Proxima Colony. Mixed human-alien settlement. Population: 1 million beings from 6 species, including about 40,000 of your people. Commander Luxera? The Raiders were a coalition of pirate species using stolen council technology. The aliens leaned forward despite themselves. This was not in any of their intelligence files. The original defense plan called for evacuating the non-combatants and falling back to prepared positions. Standard council doctrine. I was a platoon sergeant at the time, not in command, but I'd studied every multi-species engagement in human military history. Marcus manipulated the display, showing troop movements and tactical positions. The plan failed because each species fought the way they were trained to fight, but they didn't fight as a unit. Thraxian battle leader Graxuke leaned forward. What did you do? I convinced my commanding officer to try something different. We cross-trained. Corvan heavy troops learned to coordinate with Thraxian shock tactics. Valdrus energy beings provided reconnaissance for Zephyrian scouts. Quantum collective units served as communication relays between groups that couldn't normally coordinate effectively. Marcus highlighted different sections of the battlefield. The result was a defense that the pirates couldn't predict or counter. They were prepared to fight 5 different species using 5 different tactical doctrines. They were not prepared to fight one force that combined the strengths of all five while covering each other's weaknesses. The room was completely quiet now. Harassed Major Thane spoke first. "You are saying we should abandon our traditional fighting methods?" "I'm saying you should evolve them," Marcus replied. "Your heavy armor and defensive capabilities are unmatched in the galaxy, Major. But what if Thraxian shock troops could use that armor as mobile cover for close-range attacks? What if Valdris energy beings could provide overwatch for Corvin positions while Zephyrian scouts fed targeting data to Quantum Collective artillery coordinators?" Commander Luxera pulsed with colors that translated as intense consideration. Such coordination would require unprecedented trust and communication between our forces. "Yes, it would," Marcus agreed. "And we have about 4 hours to make it work." The next 3 hours were the most intense crash course in interspecies military cooperation ever attempted. Marcus didn't try to change fundamental tactics. Instead, he focused on interfaces between different fighting styles. Corvin shields could protect Thraxian berserkers during their initial charge, allowing the shock troops to reach enemy positions intact instead of taking casualties during approach. Valdris energy beings could phase through Corvin defensive lines to strike at enemies trying to flank the heavy troops. Zephyrian scouts could coordinate with Quantum Collective units to provide real-time battlefield intelligence to all forces simultaneously. Most importantly, Marcus established a command structure that respected each species' military traditions while creating clear chains of communication. Corvin officers retained tactical command of their troops, but they received strategic objectives from integrated planning sessions. Thraxian battle leaders maintained their warrior honor codes while coordinating timing with other units. The Devourers arrived exactly on schedule. Marcus watched from the command center as the organic ships entered the planet's atmosphere like a swarm of living meteors. The enemy force was exactly as described: fast, adaptive, and utterly without mercy. They immediately began seeding the planet's surface with assault forms, while aerial swarms moved to establish air superiority. "All units, this is command," Marcus spoke into the communication system. "Remember, the Devourers expect us to fight like we always have. Let's show them something new." The battle began at the outer perimeter, where mixed Corvin Thraxian units engaged the initial wave of Devourer ground forms. The aliens had expected traditional defensive positioning, static lines with heavy troops anchoring fixed positions. Instead, they found coordinated assault teams using Corvin armor as mobile fortifications for Thraxian close combat specialists. Devourer bioforms that tried to flank the heavy positions found themselves facing Valdris energy commandos emerging from solid matter, while Zephyrian scouts provided targeting data that allowed Quantum Collective artillery to hit enemy concentrations before they could adapt. "Enemy aerial swarms are adapting to our anti-air patterns," reported Commander Luxera from her position. "They're learning to avoid our energy weapons." "Switch to pattern Delta 7, Marcus ordered. "Let the Quantum Collective handle primary anti-air, while Valdris units focus on ground support." The change caught the Devourers completely off guard. Their adaptive algorithms had been calibrating against energy-based air defenses, but suddenly they faced kinetic artillery that operated on completely different principles. The aerial swarms took heavy casualties before they could adjust. On the ground, the mixed species tactics were proving devastatingly effective. Devourer assault forms that had evolved to counter specific species fighting styles found themselves facing hybrid tactics they couldn't classify or predict. A Corvin defensive position would suddenly sprout Thraxian berserkers emerging from behind the shields, while Valdris energy beings provided covering fire from positions the bioforms couldn't reach. "The hive mind nodes are responding," reported Zephyrian scout leader Zixera. "They're pulling back their forces and reorganizing." Marcus studied the tactical display as the Devourer assault halted. The 3 hive mind nodes were the coordination centers for the entire enemy force. They were adapting to his tactics, which meant the next wave would be much more dangerous. "Time for Phase 2, Marcus announced. "All units, implement the shell game." What happened next had never been attempted in galactic military history. The entire defending force began a coordinated rotation that made it appear as though each unit was in multiple places simultaneously. Corvin heavy troops moved to positions previously held by Thraxian shock forces, while the Thraxians took over Valdris energy positions. The Quantum Collective units split and merged with other groups, creating false signatures everywhere. To the hive mind nodes, it looked like the defending force had suddenly multiplied and was occupying impossible positions. The bioforms began attacking empty positions while the real defenders struck from unexpected angles. Civilian casualties holding at 2.3%, reported the Medical Coordination Center. Defensive lines are holding across all sectors. The Devourers launched their final assault, a massive wave of heavy bioforms led by the three hive mind nodes themselves. This was the moment when most defenses broke, when the coordination collapsed under pressure, and each species fell back to instinctive fighting patterns. Marcus had been waiting for this moment. All units, execute Operation Sledgehammer. Every defensive position suddenly opened fire simultaneously, not at the approaching Devourers, but at carefully selected points in the colony's mineral infrastructure. The bombardment triggered controlled geological events, landslides, steam eruptions, and electromagnetic disturbances that channeled the entire Devourer assault into three narrow corridors. In those corridors, the mixed-species forces were waiting with the most devastating ambush in Council military history. Corvin heavy weapons provided overwhelming firepower. Thraxian shock troops engaged in close combat that the Devourers couldn't adapt to quickly enough, Valdris energy being struck from impossible angles. Quantum Collective units provided perfect coordination, and Zephyrian scouts ensured that no enemy force could escape the kill zones. The three hive mind nodes were destroyed within minutes of each other. Without their coordination, the remaining Devourer bioforms reverted to individual predator behavior, making them easy targets for the now experienced multi-species teams. When the simulation ended, the command center was silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. Marcus stood at the tactical display, looking at the results. Final civilian casualties, 4.7%. Enemy forces, completely eliminated. Mission time, 6 hours, 43 minutes. Simulation complete. Announced the computer system. Preparing final trial parameters. Marcus turned to his command staff, expecting to see them returning to their separate groups and species loyalties. Instead, he found all of them still standing together, looking at him with expressions he couldn't quite identify. Karask Major Thane spoke first. In 40 years of military service, I have never seen tactical coordination like that. Thraxian battle leader Grax UK's claws were retracted, a sign of respect among his species. You fought like a true warrior, but you thought like something more than a warrior. Commander Luxera pulsed with colors that indicated profound respect. Our energy forms will remember this battle configuration. It should be studied and refined. The Quantum Collective representatives spoke in unison. Consensus achieved. Human tactical innovations represent significant advancement in multi-species coordination doctrine. Scout leader Zixera clicked her mandibles in what passed for applause among Zephyrians. We have never seen such effective use of combined intelligence gathering and tactical adjustment. Marcus nodded to each of them. We couldn't have done it without every one of your specialties. That's the point. 2 hours later, Marcus stood in the center of the Council Chamber's combat arena, facing Thraxian War Chief Korgmoth. The massive alien was even larger than he had appeared in the assembly hall. Nearly 10 feet tall, weighing close to 800 pounds, with natural armor that could deflect energy weapons and claws that could slice through steel. The arena was a simple circle of polished metal, 50 meters in diameter, with no weapons provided and no rules except that the combat would continue until one participant was dead. You have impressed many with your cleverness, little human, Korgmoth rumbled, his voice echoing through the chamber. But cleverness will not save you from my claws. I have killed the champions of 17 species in this arena. Marcus stood in a relaxed, ready position, his hands empty, his expression calm. Around the arena, representatives from every council species watched with intense interest. The betting pools had shifted again after his second trial performance, but most aliens still expected the Thraxian to win. Physical combat was supposed to be humanity's greatest weakness. I know, Marcus replied simply. I studied the recordings of those fights. Korgmoth's eyes narrowed. And what did you learn? I learned that you're used to fighting champions who try to match your strength with their strength. Marcus began moving slowly to his left, circling the larger opponent. Power against power. Speed against speed. Natural weapons against natural weapons. The war chief turned to follow Marcus's movement, his massive frame surprisingly graceful. Yes, it is the warrior's way. How else does one fight? Like a human. Marcus suddenly dropped into a slide that took him directly between Korgmoth's legs. As he passed under the alien, he struck upward with both hands at specific points on the war chief's ankle joints, not trying to cause damage, but targeting nerve clusters that would temporarily disrupt the alien's balance. Korgmoth stumbled, more from surprise than injury, and Marcus was already moving to his next position. The human had somehow gotten behind him and was now targeting the back of his knee with a precise strike that made his leg buckle. Stand and fight, Korgmoth roared, spinning to face his opponent. I'm fighting, Marcus replied, dodging a massive swipe that would have taken his head off. Just not the way you expected. What followed was unlike any combat the Council had ever witnessed. Marcus never tried to overpower his opponent, never attempted to block or deflect the devastating attacks that could have killed him instantly. Instead, he flowed around the war chief like water around a boulder, striking at nerve centers, joint connections, and pressure points with surgical precision. Korgmoth grew increasingly frustrated as his attacks failed to connect. The humans seemed to anticipate every move, always positioned just outside the reach of the deadly claws, always striking back at exactly the wrong moment to disrupt the war chief's attacks. This is not honorable combat, the Thraxian bellowed. This is human combat, Marcus corrected, ducking under another swipe and delivering a precise strike to Korgmoth's elbow that temporarily numbed the alien's entire arm. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. The crowd of alien observers was completely silent now. They had expected to see a slaughter, with the primitive human quickly overwhelmed by superior size and strength. Instead, they were watching their greatest warrior being systematically dismantled by an opponent who refused to play by traditional rules. Marcus had spent the 2-hour preparation period studying every piece of available data on Thraxian physiology. He knew exactly where their nerve clusters were located, how their joints articulated, and, most importantly, how their psychology worked. Thraxians were proud warriors who expected honorable single combat. They were not prepared for an opponent who treated fighting as a technical problem to be solved. After 15 minutes of frustrating near misses and accumulating nerve damage, Korgmoth was breathing heavily and struggling to coordinate his movements. His natural armor remained undamaged, but the nervous system that controlled his massive body was being systematically disrupted. Impossible, he gasped. You have no strength, no weapons, no armor. How are you doing this? Marcus paused his constant movement for just a moment. Because I'm not trying to be stronger than you. I'm not trying to be faster than you. I'm not trying to be better armored than you. Then, what are you trying to do? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in the fight, it was not a tactical expression. It was genuinely friendly. I'm trying to be smarter than you. The final sequence lasted less than 30 seconds. Marcus feinted toward Korgmoth's injured left side, causing the war chief to overcommit to defending that angle. As the massive alien turned, Marcus slipped behind him and delivered a series of precise strikes to specific points along the war chief's spine, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but accurate enough to temporarily disrupt the nerve signals controlling Korgmoth's legs. The war chief toppled forward, his enormous mass working against him as he lost control of his lower body. Marcus immediately moved to a position behind the fallen alien's head and placed his hands against Korgmoth's throat, not to strangle, but to demonstrate that he could have delivered a killing blow if he had chosen to. "Do you yield?" Marcus asked quietly. Korgmoth lay still for a long moment, his massive chest heaving with exertion and his eyes staring at the arena ceiling. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the silent chamber. "I yield." Marcus immediately stepped away and offered his hand to help the war chief stand. Korgmoth looked at the extended hand with surprise, then gripped it and allowed the human to help him to his feet. "You fought with honor," Marcus said formally. Korgmoth studied the human who had just defeated him without ever attempting to cause permanent injury. "No, little warrior. You fought with something much rarer than honor. You fought with wisdom." The arena erupted in a cacophony of alien sounds as representatives from every species responded to what they had just witnessed. Some were clearly outraged, others amazed, and a few appeared to be experiencing something that might have been fear. In the center of it all, Marcus stood quietly, waiting for the official judgment. The Zephyrian ambassador rose from his position, his mandibles clicking as he processed what had just occurred. "The trials are complete. The human Marcus Chun has satisfied all requirements for species membership evaluation." The chamber fell silent again. However, the ambassador continued, "The council must now consider whether humanity's unconventional approach to military matters represents an acceptable addition to our collective security arrangements." Marcus stepped forward. "With respect, Ambassador, I think you're asking the wrong question." The translator system carried his words to every corner of the massive chamber. Thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and attention-focusing organs turned toward him. "The question isn't whether humanity's approach is acceptable to you," Marcus continued. "The question is whether you can afford not to have us as allies when you face enemies who might not fight the way you expect them to." He gestured toward the mixed species command staff who had participated in the second trial. They had remained together and were now standing as a unified group rather than separate species delegations. "3 days ago, you saw us as primitive, weak, and worthless. Today, 5 of your finest hunters were defeated by 1 human with basic equipment and local materials. A theoretical invasion that had never been successfully repelled was stopped with minimal casualties. Your greatest warrior was defeated without sustaining permanent injury." Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of as many delegates as possible. "We're not asking you to change how you fight. We're offering to teach you how we think. Because the next time you face an enemy that adapts to your traditional tactics, you're going to need someone who can adapt faster." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Then, slowly, Korgmoth stepped forward to stand beside Marcus. "The human speaks wisdom," the war chief announced. "I have learned more about combat in 3 days than I had learned in 3 years. Humanity should be welcomed not just as members, but as teachers." One by one, the members of the mixed species command staff joined them in the center of the arena. Then, to Marcus's surprise, the 5 hunters from the first trial approached as well. Each of them bore marks from their encounters with his traps, but they all stood with him. Finally, delegates began moving from their positions around the chamber. Not all of them, perhaps not even half, but enough to make it clear that something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrian ambassador looked around the chamber, his compound eyes taking in the unprecedented scene of voluntary interspecies cooperation centered around a single human. "The motion for humanity's admission to the Galactic Council is approved," he announced. As cheers, clicks, harmonic resonances, and particle swarm celebrations filled the chamber, Marcus stood quietly and thought about home. Earth would receive the formal notification in a few hours, along with a complete recording of the trials. He wondered what the Joint Chiefs would think when they learned that humanity had not only been admitted to the Galactic Council, but had apparently started a revolution in interspecies military cooperation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun, United States Marine Corps, had been sent to prove that humanity deserved a seat at the galactic table. Instead, he had proven that the galaxy needed humanity's help more than humanity needed theirs. The real work was just beginning.